Welcome back, eDiscovery viewers. Today we have Daniel Barak again. He is coming over so many times to our studio, and it's always great to have you every single time. We will never get tired of you coming over here. I always enjoy talking to you here. And again, more forensic talk. Today, email collection. Do we collect from a mail server or do we collect from a device? What is the better way to collect your email? And what's happening to you, Donnie, is client comes in with a laptop and says, we need to review emails, and drop off a laptop. And I don't think you think that's the best way of handling that.
No, but a lot of people do think that. They'll say the emails are on my computer.
Yes.
So here's my computer. I get to them through Gmail.
Yep.
So a lot of times people don't understand exactly how it's stored. Even if they're using Outlook or if they're using Mail on a Mac, that doesn't necessarily represent the entire universe of emails.
Right. So you can get emails from a laptop.
You can get emails from a laptop, but if you have access to the server usually contains the most current snapshot of those emails.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that doesn't mean you should never go to the computer, because depending on how you're set up, you may have archived things to the computer. The computer may not have synchronized with the server, so there may be stuff that was deleted from the server that's still on the computer. But as a primary data source, you don't necessarily want to go to the computer, because the email applications are actually interested in saving space on the machine and not necessarily retaining everything. Right? So what that means is you may see a list of all of your email messages that are available on your mailbox on the server, but they may not be actually on your computer until you click on it and it goes to the internet and downloads it from the server. So while you might think they're there, if you were to go and process that, you might get a bunch of headers that have like your to and your from and your CC and your subject, but not the actual body. It just may be missing.
So the major downside of processing from a device is not all emails are there. There may be only a certain date range synchronized, or just headers for certain devices.
Right.
Also, if you're using some kind of odd email software, which not a lot of people do, but some do, it may be more difficult to process. There may be a conversion process involved. So it's best to avoid that if possible, but if not, that can be done as well.
And one of the things that we've seen is people will use, like Nick said, proprietary email software that's not standard, like Mail or Thunderbird or Outlook. There's stuff in the Mac App Store where they just took an email app that they would publish for a phone and they publish it on the Mac, but it really only keeps like the last few days of email. It doesn't write an entire archive to the drive, so it doesn't actually exist on the machine.
Yep. Now, before we continue, there's one upside of collecting data from a device, especially a laptop, that you mentioned, is if user makes an archives of their messages. So let's say maybe there's a limit of how much messages they can keep on the server. Well, every few months they go in and take a month and dump it out to a PST file and save it on a C drive, right? So those messages will no longer exist on the server. So there's an advantage to taking data from the device. So with that in mind, let's talk about what do we recommend practically.
So practically speaking, we like to try to think of all the different sources where email could reside, right? The first thing we'll say is, okay, where's your live server, if that exists? And you want to preserve and collect the email in its live state. If they've created archives, as you mentioned, you don't necessarily just want to look on their computers, although that's probably the most likely source. A lot of times companies will set up a policy where you can't keep more than a certain amount of email on the server, and they'll give people a shared folder on a network drive to dump all of their PST archives to.
Right.
So we've seen a lot of people forget about those, and then they look at the Outlook and they say, well, we're missing an entire date range because there's a PST in the PST folder on their shared drive that they didn't think to collect. So these are the types of questions we like to ask up front, right? We'll say, what's your server? What's your archiving policy? Even do custodial interviews where you ask them what they traditionally do once their email reaches a certain point. Where does their IT tell them to do it? Have they ever created archives? Those types of questions become very important early in the process, so that you don't end up in a situation where you're in the middle of your document review and maybe you produced it already, and then they're like, hey, where's this giant chunk of data?
We're missing
we
a
have
few
the
months.
email, but you don't have the email, so what happened to it?
Yeah.
And archives are course of business. A lot of people do it. It has nothing to do with spoliation or deleting evidence 90% of the time. So you just want to make sure that you ask all those questions so that you don't make a mistake and miss it.
And I guess I can say, as a general rule, if you're not able to do an interview, where we would start first is the email server, collect data directly from an email server, process that first, then go to a physical device, get email from there, and let that deduplicate against data you processed from the email server and any of the archives and anything that you find.
Yeah, that's the most complete way to do it, although one caveat there is if you were to download, let's say, from Office 365 the live data, and then they had Apple Mail as their email client, and you try to deduplicate those.
That gets to a completely different discussion
conversation.
about deduplication and why two emails could look the same but be slightly different and not being identified. And I believe we've done video about that.
That's a fun one.
Yes. All right, guys, so if you have any questions about this, feel free to reach out to us. Daniel will be happy to answer any questions you have, or what kind of questions can be asked custodian to get all the information about where the data could be stored and, well, anything we talked about. And in the meantime, don't forget to follow eDiscovery on social media networks listed on your screen. And for previous videos, check us out on YouTube. Thanks for watching.